From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
The Wichita City Council delays action on a plan that would sacrifice parkland for a major freeway expansion. Also, parents, students, school officials, and police deal with a domestic violence shooting outside a Wichita elementary school. But first, 5,000 Textron aviation workers are on strike. What's the potential impact? That's what we're talking about on this edition of Kansas Week. Hello and welcome to Kansas Week. I'm Jared Cerullo. 5,000 machinists who helped build Cessna and Beechcraft airplanes went on strike this week. The workers say they need and deserve more pay. Cake's Nick Nelson brings us the story.
2 on, 2 off, come on.
Members of the International Association of Machinists working for Textron Aviation are now on strike after denying the latest contract offer from the company.
I'm looking for a wage that's just a better quality of life, you know. I mean, I live a pretty normal life, and sometimes we fall short on a few things. I like to go on vacation and stuff like that, take the girls out and do all that.
Textron Aviation says it's committed to negotiating in good faith with the IAM, but also adds that no one benefits from a strike.
We are prepared for a work stoppage and have plans in place to ensure uninterrupted service and support for our customers. Maintaining the health of our business will require flexibility from employees across all functions.
However, with thousands of Textron Aviation workers on the picket lines, there are concerns about production of the planes the company produces.
I know that the rumor was one of our biggest customers said that they didn't want anybody but the mechanics working on the plane. So I'm over in that building quite a bit, and that's what it sounds like to me. So that's some leverage.
Here to discuss this and some of the week's other big stories, first off, we have Republican State Representative from Heston, Stephen Owens. Also, Russell Ford, Dr. Fox. Sorry about that. Thanks for joining us this weekend from Friends University. And Ford Carr, a Democrat representative from Wichita. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Representative Owens, I'll start with you. Striking workers, unfortunately, is not new to Wichita. Is there anything at the state level that's going on to help alleviate this situation?
Well, not necessarily on a state level. We're certainly keenly aware because aviation is such an important part of our economy. But let's look at what's been going on nationally with inflation in the double digits and how that's impacting every single Kansan. It hits home even though we have little control over it. We knew it was coming though, right? When you print $6 trillion over the course of a short period of time as our federal government has, these things are bound to happen because people need increased wages to be able to take care of their families and afford food and afford rent and property taxes and all those other things.
And Representative Carr, the rising cost of inflation has definitely played a part, and these workers say enough is enough, and it's time for them to make better wages.
I mean, this is definitely true. Unfortunately, based on what happened, during and immediately following the pandemic, the inflation just rose out of control. But fortunately, the United States has recovered, more rapidly than any other country. And coming from an aviation background myself and an aviation family, irrespective of inflation, these are things that are going to happen, right? There have been strikes for as long as I can remember, and that's just a wage battle between the employees and the companies, and until and if ever they can't get on the same page, then you're going to have these strikes. They're inevitable, regardless of what the inflation might be or may not be.
Yeah, Dr. Fox, I'll move on to you. Are these workers asking for too much?
I don't think so, and I say that without a lot of detailed knowledge in regards to, the specifics of the offer that was hammered out between the corporate leadership and the own union leadership. I mean, they presented a compromise offer and the workers voted it down. So, like Steve mentioned, we have to look at these things in terms of national macroeconomic trends. We have to recognize that, there are all sorts of concerns that play into day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month budget decisions that some of these workers are dealing with. You know, the individual that was interviewed as part of that story, I mean, this is somebody who's talking about wanting to be able to earn the sort of wage that enables them to have a pretty solid middle class life, take the family on vacations and that sort of thing. That's something that has unfortunately gotten out of the reach of too many workers in too many industries. And the fact that they have union tools to try to push for better wages and push for better deals is something that makes them relatively distinct. Not as distinct as they used to be. There has been an increase in union activity across a lot of different industries. As Ford was pointing out, there's a long history here in Wichita of the unions being active in terms of fighting to improve their position. That's part of the reason why I don't think that Wichita and the state of Kansas needs to be especially worried about this strike. I mean, obviously they need to watch it carefully and they need to be aware of the economic ramifications. But people are aware that this is the reality in the aircraft industry. I don't think anybody on the corporate level is terribly shocked. I mean, maybe they're frustrated, maybe they were hoping to avoid this strike, but I doubt that they're looking at this and saying, well, I never could have seen this coming, because there's a lot of history here backing it up.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how long this strike goes. And of course, with Boeing on strike, of course, Spirit Aerosystems is a supplier of Boeing. Hopefully this will get resolved as quickly as possible. We'll move on. A husband and wife are both expected to survive after investigators say he shot her and then a sheriff's deputy shot him outside a Wichita elementary school. Cake's Pilar Pedraza takes a look at the timeline of events and how law enforcement and school officials dealt with this situation.
2130, 21 Jennifer, first shooting, 45th and Clear.
Police Chief Joe Sullivan says calls like this go out on all first responder channels, and everyone is trained to head in that direction. Which is why a Sedgwick County deputy was the first to arrive at the scene in the city of Wichita.
He located a 46-year-old male of Wichita who was armed with a handgun and made statements that the deputy would kill him while pointing the gun at the deputy.
Sullivan said Tuesday the suspect then ran and laid on top of the 30-year-old woman who had already been shot several times.
The deputy gave commands for the suspect to drop his gun, and the deputy saw the suspect place the gun to the female's head. In defense of the female, the deputy fired his handgun twice.
The chief said parents quickly got the few children outside the school when the shooting started in the front door, and a staffer locked and blocked it. Actions that were just one part of the school's security plan.
259 has actually made security enhancements to this particular school in the last year, and certainly it proved its worth yesterday.
It's important for students to feel safe when they're at school. That's the only way they're able to learn.
The district Tuesday activated another part of its response plan, the counseling crisis team at the school to help kids deal with what they saw and heard.
Students not feeling well, sometimes it's behaviors, being withdrawn even, and so there's processes in place where teachers are able to reach out to support staff.
And Dr. Fox, I'll start with you. This is a terrible situation, obviously. We never think something like this is going to happen in our community until it does.
Right. And I don't want to at all deny the trauma that's associated with this. I mean, it's important to recognize that this was a tragedy for all involved. I think it is also important to recognize at the same time that across the United States, when people hear the words shooting and school in the same sentence, they instantly conjure up all sorts of memories of past school shootings, and so often those memories involve tragedies that have spiraled out of control. They include confusion on the part of school leaders. They include insufficient or confusing law enforcement responses. In this case, terrible as it is, I think we saw the systems mostly responding exactly the way we would hope that they would respond. Obviously, this is not a school shooting in the horrible way that we have seen it, where someone is targeting children and they have, every intention of coming up with a high body count and maybe ending their own lives. No, this was a domestic dispute, a targeted domestic dispute. And this was something that schools and police enforcement could quickly get a handle on. And that's something that we have to, recognize and not just file this away as another school shooting tragedy. I mean, it is a tragedy, but this was the sort of tragedy that the systems we have in place seem to be somewhat better able to respond to. And obviously they did with it here.
Representative Carr, do you agree?
I have to agree.
Yeah.
As tragic as it was just, unfortunately for everyone involved, it was just that time of day. Whatever troubles those two are having, domestically as a couple, it's unfortunate that they couldn't have gotten some help earlier, and things wouldn't have unfolded the way they unfolded. I don't think that it was a plan, and as the good doctor stated, I don't consider this falling in the category of a school shooting. Yeah. This was just a shooting that happened to end up in close proximity of a school.
Yeah.
And I might just throw out there, it seems like we have this culture of violence right now, and it really starts at the top, right? We've had 2 assassination attempts on our president. Yeah. Violence seems to run rampant, and it's upon us as leaders to change this direction of this culture of violence, to show that the political division does not have to end in violence. And I think until we start doing better as congressmen, senators, representative legislators in bridging that divide, this somehow acceptable level of violence is trickling all the way down. And so we can do better and be a better example as well.
But some might say the answer is gun control.
Yeah, well, you know what? The Second Amendment is absolutely clear and shall not be infringed.
But I mean, the fact that you brought that up actually goes to Ford's point that, what we're really talking about here is something that involves questions about the availability of guns. It also involves questions about, mental health and counseling. It involves things having to do about family values and, and all sorts of things like that. It's not actually the sort of problem that we tend to associate with school shootings. Right. And so it's probably important to separate those out to a certain degree.
And
30 seconds.
I would have to agree with my colleague. It does start at the top, and when we kind of preach that sort of violent rhetoric at the top, then it makes it seem like commonplace, and acceptable behavior. So, I would hope that we can do something about that at the highest level, because certainly in the past several years, violence has been something that's been talked about at that level as an acceptable piece of our culture, and it's not.
Good discussion. We'll move on. Questions are being raised about the loss of city parkland to accommodate for a major freeway expansion across northeast Wichita. Cake's Abby Ray shows us the potential impact and the response it's getting as well.
Wichita's City Council decided to delay action on the K96 improvement project, opting to wait to hear more from KDOT about what the parkland looks like that'll be impacted by this expansion.
Every effort's been made to do a great job to not adversely impact the intended use of these parks.
The Kansas Department of Transportation's K96 improvements project includes expanding the freeway from 4 lanes to 6 lanes, replacing pavement and reconfiguring interchanges by adding diverging diamond interchanges and braided ramps. As Wichita's population grows 3.1% annually, expansions like this are necessary.
We don't always build for now, we build for what we think is going to come and what the data shows will come.
But the expansions come at a cost, though the cost is not quite as high as some citizens are concerned about.
Some of the impact to some of the city of Wichita park space really isn't a whole lot. It's a couple feet here, a couple feet there.
K96 Lake Park will have less than 1 acre of its 46-acre area affected. About 1 acre of Chisholm Creek Park North and about 2 acres of Chisholm Creek Park South will be impacted. And the K96 bike trail will be closed in certain areas. But that's only temporary, and the trail will be reconstructed at the end of the project. Construction is expected to begin early 2026. The Wichita Parks Board had previously voted to approve the project.
It's something that, again, the grand scheme of things isn't a large impact to the park system.
And Representative Carr, I'll start with you. Councilmember Johnson there, who I've had the pleasure to work with, seems to downplay this situation that taking away parkland is minimal, and he claims it's very small. But no matter what, when we talk about getting rid of parkland or the city leaving parkland, many people come out of the woodwork against it, and that seems to be what's happening here.
Exactly. I sit on the Transportation and Safety Budget Committee in the legislature, and I can remember when this was a subject, a topic when they were applying for those funds. And now that I look at it, I wish we had gotten an opportunity to come and take a look at just how much of the parkway would be taken up. My concern is always when we start taking away the land that's there for nature, right? So that our families and the children behind us have an opportunity to enjoy it. Then I'm also concerned. I don't know if the lightheartedness that my colleague, the good councilman, spoke of is accurate or not, and that concerns me. At this point, I'd like to go and take a look personally at just how much of the parkland that we're talking about, before I could say yes or no. It's going to have an invasive effect, on the park over there, or whether the what it does for the city, is worked out to be more of an advantage.
Right.
If I might add on to that, first, I'm glad we're having this conversation over public parkland than somebody's house or somebody's farm that's been in there for generation, because we could be talking about eminent domain. And that is something that certainly crosses a line in many instances. When we look at what's ultimately best for our community and what's best for Kansas as a whole, we know that it is growth. We know that it's economic development. We know that the best thing for the taxpayer is to have more taxpayers in the state to share that burden. And so while, yes, I hate to see good public lands being used, I would much rather it be public lands being used than somebody's private property.
That's true. Dr. Fox, do you agree?
Well, I'm unfortunately one of those that has issues. So I'm going to probably be picking up on a lot of the things that Ford just said. But your point about growth is a really important one. We got to be thinking about growth, but when we think about growth, we also don't want to be, throwing around government money on behalf of growth that isn't really taking place. The reporter cited one statistic suggesting that Wichita has 3.1% annual growth in its population. There's data from both the city and the county that would suggest that that's not true. I live over on the west side of Wichita. I'm not using the K96 interchange that often. You're up in Heston. You probably have much more familiarity with it than me. There are people talking about how, it's becoming increasingly congested. We really need to expand to 6 lanes. I haven't actually observed that, and I know people that have done studies that suggest that Wichita actually has some of the least congestion for a city of its size, given how much money has been poured into our roads over the years. So I would, if we're thinking about growth and if we're insisting that we have to build on behalf of future drivers, future development, let's make sure that we're actually having a really good assessment of the data before we do so, especially when we're cutting in to parkland, something like the Great Plains Nature Center. I mean, this is a defined space. The people that work there are ecologists, these are scientists, these are environmental biologists. They've worked to protect that ecosystem. They've taken a look at indicators around their entire defined space. And if it happens that we are willing to sign off on KDOT simply saying, yeah, but we got to take some of your land, and there's not going to be any kind of formal pushback, what kind of precedent does that lay for the future? You're worried about, eminent domain. I think we should be worried about simply saying, well, of course we can sacrifice parkland. Then 2 years from now we sacrifice more. Then 3 years from now we're sacrificing even more. So let's be clear about the data before we sign off on these things.
Representative Carr, that's the argument seems to be that K96, which I believe, I may be wrong here, but I believe K96 is the newest highway in Wichita's metro area compared to 135 and 235. It's one of the newest state highways that goes around the northeast part of the city. But as Dr. Fox mentioned, the growth doesn't seem to be there. So should we be planning for future growth, or should we wait for that growth to happen before reacting?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, right? If I knew the answer to that question, I probably wouldn't be sitting here. I'd probably be sitting on a beach somewhere with one of those drinks with a small umbrella. But to the doctor's point, the precedent that would be set, it's concerning to me, because typically when you take these highways, and historically speaking, and not just this state, but in any state, when we begin to build and expand highways, when we get to a point where eminent domain, is applicable, it always seems to be somewhere where there are more underserved communities than anywhere else. And so with that in mind, setting that precedent, as the doctor said, that, that's concerning to me, right?
And I actually really would want to hear from Steve, since, you come down from Heston. There's already been a lot of work that's been done on that interchange. It's still going on right now. Do you see, as a commuter there, a real demand for 6 lanes?
Well, I don't know if there's a real demand for 6 lanes, but there is certainly a demand for the expansion to 2 and to 3 lanes. And if that has to work to go back the other direction, that's 6. Because, I used to work in Wichita and I would commute back to Heston, and that 235 interchange was always the biggest bottleneck in the system. Well, we fixed that. Well, now you have this new bottleneck for those headed south that are trying to merge onto K96, but also coming off at 235. And the amount of traffic that's growing out with the new developments in Greenwich Road and Webb Road and, Andover, Augusta, that traffic flow is increasing. And let's not forget that it's going to be cheaper to do it today than it will be tomorrow in a month or 10 years as inflation continues to go up and the value of the dollar continues to go down.
The cost of these things will never go down.
That's exactly right.
Caregivers of Kansans with dementia and Alzheimer's are now eligible for some financial relief from the state. CAKE's Abby Ray also takes a look at the need and the potential impact of these $1,000 per year grants.
It is hard to explain to people what it's really like day to day, minute to minute.
Judy Salo cares for her husband of 30 years, Chuck, who was diagnosed with dementia back in 2021.
It is 24/7. He's up and down all night long. I don't always hear him, but I do hear him a lot. He talks in his sleep, so I never rest well.
She attended Tuesday's Lunch and Learn at the library to hear about the Kansas Respite for Alzheimer's and Dementia program. It allows informal caregivers to apply for grants of up to $1,000 each year per person they're caring for. That money can go towards approved adult daycare, overnight care, in-home care, and homemaker services, hopefully giving those caregivers a much-needed break. And this grant isn't income-based.
These funds are awarded on a first-come, first-served basis, and caregivers actually, which is great news, can reapply for these funds each year.
I feel like as he continues to go down the ladder, I will probably need to do more things for myself just so that I can keep my health.
Mark Chamberlain is a caregiver to his wife, Barbara, who's only been formally diagnosed with Alzheimer's since 2022.
It's exhausting when when your sleeves are rolled up every day caring for this person. And the fact that you can hire a service now to come in and give you a breather is really amazing.
He says he's grateful grant programs like this exist to hopefully benefit not just the more than 54,000 people with Alzheimer's, but their families and caregivers too.
The Alzheimer's Association and this program offers us some hope, and that's what we cling to, hope and science.
Representative Owens, I've, for the last 7 years of my mother's life, although she didn't have Alzheimer's or dementia, was a caregiver along with my father, and you've been a caregiver for a family member as well?
Yeah, my father passed away in 2018 after an 8-year battle with early onset Alzheimer's, and so while I don't know it to the full extent, my mother would if she was sitting here, because I know what a tremendous amount of effort and time that takes. And truly, as the gentleman said, it's absolutely exhausting. And it's hard to cope with that emotionally, to watch someone step down. And so I think this is really a fantastic program. It's the first that I've heard of it. I think it's great because it will give those caregivers the opportunity to step back and to be able to take a break and recharge their batteries as well. And I've got to put in a plug for our long-term care facilities and the incredible work that they do in our communities as well to take care of these folks that have Alzheimer's and dementia.
Representative Carr, is $1,000 enough, or should it be more?
That's exactly where I was going.
Yeah.
I don't think it's enough. As a child, my grandmother had Alzheimer's, and my mother at the time thought that it was best that we bring her to live with us. And it is literally 24/7 work. And today, you know, I think, and as much as I'm extremely appreciative, as my colleague stated, this was the first that I'd heard of it. And I'm certainly appreciative that the $1,000 is now available in a grant form. Personally, I don't think it's nearly enough. You know, the work that has to be put in to take care of someone who at times simply doesn't even know where they are. The work is never ending, and maybe that's something we should look at the state level, increasing that.
Certainly.
And a lot of people, when this first happened to my family, we didn't know where to turn either. Right. So that money could be used to help find resources as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of those resources are right there in our community, but we don't even know where to turn to. And so reaching out to our local health department, reaching out to our long-term care facilities, reaching out to our hospitals, they'll be able to plug you in with those resources. And I tend to agree. Whatever this funding source is, I'd love to dig into it and look at it more, because $1,000, while still a significant amount of money, certainly doesn't go very far when you're talking 24/7 care by a licensed professional to come in and to give you that break.
Yeah. Dr. Fox, anything to add there?
I'm in agreement with what these gentlemen have said. This is a fine program. I'd like to see it go forward and see what are the needs, what are the impacts that it's having. If there's opportunities to expand it, I think we absolutely got to pursue those.
All right. Good discussion. And that will have to be the last word, because we are out of time. And I once again want to thank Russell Arbin Fox, Stephen Owens, and Ford Carr for joining the discussion this week. And we'd like to hear from you as well. Thank you, Cake and KSN, for sharing their stories. You can always email us at kansasweek@kpts.org. I'm Jared Cerullo. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.